I told Mr. McKibben that in my remarks that I was going to mention a project that I've been asked to be a part of, which is I'm on the board of the Natural Resources Defense Council, and climate change legislation is the top of their agenda. And I have the, I would say, unenviable task of trying to persuade a group of 8 to 10 senators to vote in the affirmative, and have, as a consequence of that, discovered a rather dismaying, I think, fact, which is climate change legislation is going to be exceptionally difficult to pass. I would say certainly in 2009 with health care dominating the agenda, but perhaps even in 2010, unless we as Americans begin to see the issue differently than we do today, or perhaps not all Americans, but certainly the way that we at the NRDC have been attempting to frame this issue, that we can, in other words, that you can in the aggregate not have job loss, that you can create green jobs and you don't have to worry about this producing anything bad. It's all going to be good. Sort of the setup for the op-ed piece that Senator John Kerry and Lindsey Graham wrote last week in the New York Times, applauded as a potential compromise for climate change legislation. My own view is that there's two possibilities in looking at the facts. You either believe, after looking at the facts, that we have a serious problem on our hands, a very serious problem on our hands, which could transform the nature of life on Earth, or you don't. And I will say, Bill, that I was upset to discover that there are some individuals who I previously regarded as intelligent who are now in the Senate who have reached the conclusion that it isn't a problem. But there were also senators in 1964 who had reached the conclusion that Jim Crow laws weren't a problem. When civil rights was being debated that summer, I noted that the civil rights legislation of 64 and the voting rights legislation of 65 were an even larger interference in the marketplace than climate change legislation. There was substantial interference with almost everything that was going on in the United States of America at the time. It transformed the workplace, it transformed education, but it was a major interference on the part of the federal government. And you either believe that the discrimination that was in place at the time was wrong, or you didn't. And if you believed it was wrong, you voted in the affirmative. And if you believed that it wasn't wrong, you voted no. My view of climate change and climate change legislation that comes out of identifying that as a problem has to be considered in the same fashion. If you believe it's a problem and a moral challenge, you have to vote in the affirmative. You do not want history to record that you voted no. When I was in the Senate, I knew members of the Senate who were there in 1964 and who had voted no on civil rights because they represented southern states and they have never permanently got over it. They are ashamed of the fact that they voted no on civil rights. And when I talk to members of the Senate, that's what I say. I think if you vote in the negative, you will likewise, the older you get, you will look back on that negative vote and you will be ashamed of that vote. So unless, in my view, it is framed in that kind of moral context, it's very difficult to get into the almost the economic development argument that you can create more jobs and are likely to be destroyed. I happen to believe that you can with the right investment strategy, but I don't think it rings the bell sufficiently, particularly given the current economic conditions, to get people finally to say, damn the consequences, I'm going to vote yes. That's my political lay of the land. I told Bill that I would do that in advance of my primary responsibility here, which is to now welcome to this podium, ladies and gentlemen, the Dean of Parsons New School for Design, Joel Towers.